everyone. This is Philosophy for the People with Srefan and Ben Burgess, and we are doing our 87th episode on compatibilism this week.
Yeah, which is amazing because there've only been like 38 total essays in the Substack, and not all of them were about compatibilism. But it turns out that that's actually compatible with 87 of them being about compatibilism.
There's space for there to be 87 videos about compatibilism.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you're excited because I've got new takes today, and I guess
Right.
also new takes on what Zizek says. But in scary dark news, I don't know if you can't even tell. I've got a boo boo chat. I just cut my finger before we started streaming.
If you want to
Just
get up,
slightly redder.
if you want to get up and wash that off,
No, it's no, I think it's cool.
All right.
So
Sure.
last week, Ben was talking to Zizek.
Yeah, so we played most of this on the show on Monday. Had to pre-record it because Ljubljana is at least 87 hours or so ahead of Los Angeles, and did end up having to cut off like the last 36 minutes just for time on Monday. But we'll release the whole thing to patrons this coming Friday when they would ordinarily be getting
Zizek, uncut, uncensored.
Exactly. And then a couple weeks later we'll release it for everybody. But yeah, it's this is so yeah, a really wide-ranging conversation as you tend to have with the man. Goes all over the place. So there's a bunch of stuff toward the end. We actually kind of cut off during this about Israel-Palestine, and one states, two states, etc. There's stuff in there about Argentina. There's this stuff. There's a lot about sort of freedom in the political sense, and there's also stuff about free will and quantum physics and whether there's any relationship whatsoever between the two. And this is the point where we did end up having kind of an extended friendly debate about this, which, because basically, as is going to come out here, I liked his 2012 position, not his 2023 position on that. And we'll get into what the difference is as far as I can tell. But yeah, thought it might be fun for this one rather than, just you and I talking. Sorry, getting the plate out of the way so the cat doesn't knock it over. You and I talking about my essay about me talking to Zizek. If we streamline.
Bring in Zizek. He's waiting in the wings.
Yeah. Come on, Slavoj. It's like old Jerry Springer episodes. We've got backstage. But yeah, rather than doing that, we can. No, Jeb, I assure you, it was not just Zizek saying and so on for 36 minutes. But yeah, rather than doing that, maybe we could streamline the process a little bit by talking, about by actually watching some of this discussion and talking about, pausing it and talking about what we're watching. Obvious, if you're a text feed, we have a link to the essay itself, of course, down below the box that you're watching, as always. But yeah, it might be a fun way to sort of ground this, to actually watch some of the discussion rather than just hearing me describe it. So I think we're going to pick up here. This is just like a minute or two before the most relevant part, but it leads into it.
We are now doing the most degenerate activity on YouTube, which is reacting to a YouTube video on YouTube.
It's a very simple point. We already talked about how here I think we who still want to be some kind of socialists, whatever we call it, not so much oppose liberalism, but go a little bit deeper and fully accept the fact that our freedom needs to be embedded in certain social circumstances for our freedoms to be actual freedoms. You know, for example, I don't know if I mentioned it in this book of mine, but that was the problem with it was very limited, but nonetheless, it was a minimal something. Obamacare. Remember what was the right-wing populist counterpoint? So now the state will prescribe to us, to each doctor, blah, blah, blah. This is the general tendency, and it's an ingenious trick of, let's call it bourgeois ideology, to present us new actual limitations of our freedom as new freedoms. You know who is the best example here? He's almost my favorite guy. You know, when I say this, I mean pure horror, of course. No, you know, this guy, Milei, the new Argentinian president, he brought the notion of freedom to the end. You know, when he was asked how to help the poor, he said by extending our freedoms to make it fully legal to sell your children and your organs. In some abstract sense, this is a freedom, but thanks for such a freedom. So my point is this one, that if you look, sorry, I don't hear you, do something. Hello?
Oh, sorry. I just said it's a certain kind of freedom from limitation, you know, from constraint. But it's but if what you care about is freedom from domination or ability to sort of conduct your life as you would like, then yes, the idea of a world where people are, I suppose, selling their organs for Bitcoin so they can, you know, make rent seems like about as extreme a form of domination as I can imagine. So I did just want to briefly, if it's okay, circle back to the more philosophical point that you started with about before you started talking about social freedom. You know, when you were talking about freedom in general, and you were talking about the sort of classical kind of freedom and determinism issue, and what I wanted to ask about here is I was a little bit curious about how some of what you said about it in this book lines up with some of what you'd said before, because you in this book you sort of talk about, you seem to take very seriously the idea that these challenges from physics really make it seem like you know, maybe we just don't have free will at all. You sort of frame it as like Pascal's wager, you know, kind of issue to affirm that, you know, that we can be even in the face of it. Whereas I remember in a previous your previous book, one, like, I don't know, 10 years ago, the Less Than Nothing, you'd said something I always thought was interesting in there. If it's okay, I just want to read this out. You said, compatibilists such as Daniel Dennett have an elegant solution to the incompatibilist complaints about determinism. When incompatibilists complain that our freedom cannot be combined with the fact that all our acts are part of the great chain of natural determinism, they secretly make an unwarranted ontological assumption. First, they assume that we, the self, the free agent, somehow stand outside of reality. Then they go on to complain about how they feel oppressed by the notion that reality determinism controls them totally. This is what is wrong with the notion of us being imprisoned by the chains of natural determinism. We thereby obfuscate the fact that we are part of reality, that the possible local conflict between our free striving and external reality that resists it is a conflict inherent in reality itself. That is to say, there's nothing oppressive or constraining about the fact that our innermost strivings are predetermined. When we feel threatened in our freedom by the pressure of external reality, there must be something in us, some desire or striving that is thus thwarted. But where do such strivings come from, if not that same reality? Our free will does not in some mysterious way disturb the natural course of things. It is part and parcel of that course. For us to be truly and radically free, in quotation marks, would entail that there's no positive content involved in our free act. If we want nothing external in particular to govern our behavior, then this would involve being free from every part of ourselves. When a determinist claims that our free choice is determined, that does not mean that our free will is sometimes constrained. somehow constrained, that we are forced to act against our will. What is determined is the very thing that we want to do freely, that is, without being thwarted by external obstacles. And so I was just curious if in the years since you'd written that, if your thinking about this has shifted, and if so, kind of what caused that shift.
I'm not aware, maybe I'm always too much immersed into what I'm doing now, and you from a slightly external perspective can see it, but my basic solution is an old mantra, too philosophical to go in detail into it now. But my point is that the moment you accept this standard naturalistic vision of reality as something totally determined by natural laws, and if you include contingency, as in quantum physics, this doesn't change a lot. Because, freedom is not contingency. Like, let us say you decide, you say, I have to make a big decision now, but I will leave it to chance. Either a more subtle chance of how quantum superpositions will be, will fall into one determined reality, or more simple, which is not true chance, idea of I will toss a coin, blah, blah, and so on. But this is not freedom. This is simple chance. Freedom is not leaving it to chance. Freedom is a form of determinism. Freedom is, this is what I want to do, and I want to do it. It's not leaving it to chance. So how can we think freedom? Freedom is a determination without becoming idealists, without saying there must be another level which is outside material reality. And at that level, in the domain of spirit, we are really free. You know what worries me here, me as an old materialist, that these big disclosures, these big results, the last Nobel Prize for Physics, were precisely the guys who experimentally proved for Bohr against Einstein that two particles that you split, which are correlated, can somehow communicate faster than the speed of light. Classical experiment. Till now, it was more theoretical. Now it's definitely proven. But here our enemies, New Age spiritualists, enter. They say, Einstein was right in his description of reality, where nothing can move faster than the speed of light. If there is a communication faster than the speed of light between two correlated particles, then this must be a non-material spiritual link. So our material reality is not all that is, and so on and so on. I try precisely to reject this. Okay, to cut a long story short, I think that, that only quantum physics, but correctly interpreted with all these paradoxes, opens up a space for freedom, for what only with us humans emerges as.
Did you deliberately wear the same outfit?
It's not quite the same outfit, actually.
On this level of zoom, it looks exactly the same outfit. I was also wondering if I can like. That doesn't work. I wonder if I can get it so it's just Zizek and we can just pretend he's here, but I don't think it works.
Yeah. So this is it's a very similar outfit. The what I'm wearing now is a sports jacket and a Metallica shirt. What I was wearing then was a sports jacket and a Miss Construde shirt, which is actually same color scheme and also a metal band, but sadly less successful one than Metallica. But but the drummer in that band is actually Russell Sabriglia, who is an academic. He's like a literature professor at Seton Hall and has actually done a bunch of things with Zizek
All right.
and is the person who introduced me to him and all of that stuff. So I thought it'd be funny to to do the Misconstruity T-shirt while I was interviewing Zizek, but yeah, I think so. So I think you get in that way the basic setup, right, of the
Well, it was funny because for a while I was like, he's not saying what Ben said in the article. He's saying the right things because
yeah.
he was saying, like freedom is a determination and so on, and that just and it seemed like you could just really, stop things there. But then he just went on and, actually, and misunderstanding the results of the Nobel Prize last year or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I am not at all confident that I correctly understand them, so I'm not going to try to weigh in on that.
They misunderstood what was going on in the announcement of the Nobel Prize.
Okay.
So I think it's a widespread confusion.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So I guess on that one, I at least have the sublime Socratic wisdom of knowing that I have no clue. But in any case, there's so in the middle there, right? So because at the beginning of that clip, I mean, after the Argentina stuff, right, we get on to free will. I sort of say, hey, here's this thing you said in your book Less Than Nothing in 2012 that I really liked, and from what I can tell, I've actually gone back and read the relevant chapter much more carefully since the interview, but from what I can tell in your new book, Freedom and Disease Without Cure, you seem to be saying these very different things that kind of don't fit together in an obvious way with this. And you're right. In the beginning of his response, he sort of spends a minute sounding very compatibilist. He says that, well, it's not, I don't want to say that the, freedom is on some other, spiritual level of reality or something. I want to say that, it itself is a determination. Okay. Stop there and say, okay, I guess I must have misunderstood somehow. You are saying the same thing in 2023. You were saying 2012. But then at the end, after the after the parsing of the Nobel Prize, which actually, you should probably just tell me what it actually was for, because that'd be a good thing to know. But like, I have no idea. But in any case, but after that, he sort of says this thing that does get into what we're actually going to be disagreeing about in the rest of the discussion, which is that something about how like the quantum physics with all of its paradoxes opens up the space for free will, which suggests that however he's currently thinking about what free will is, which is a big like it's I mean, I think it's got like he says a bunch of interesting things, but how they all fit together is is a lot harder to say. But whatever he's ultimately thinking about is being right, that like if you start talking about this as something that's, well, the space for this is opened up by like the results about quantum mechanics or whatever, that certainly strongly suggests that you think that
Your mic's gone a bit weird.
oh no.
It's fine now. I think you
Okay.
just maybe a little bit too far away. You just went a bit submarine.
Okay. But yeah, it makes it sound like, you like this sort of Robert Caine-ish kind of libertarianism about free will, that you think that, you think that like quantum effects in the brain, like are sort of, maybe don't add up to free will. We're going to get to that in a minute, but like at that, but at least that if that wasn't happening, if it was all totally deterministic up there, then that would be a big problem for free will, which suggests moving away from the 2012 compatibilist position.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I was thinking about in the essay rather than the video you bring up. Zizek talking about this idea of the big other and kind of the idea that
Yeah.
we're confronted by in kind of our particular moment in postmodernity, like this scientific big other who wants to kind of crush freedom, say there's no freedom, say it can explain everything, that it's the totality of the universe and everything in it. Um, and that these quantum indeterminacies are like kind of in opposition to this, like a way for freedom. And I think that's definitely false philosophically because it's not needed. But I do actually think it's true psychologically that there is kind of both projects going on where there is definitely this project to kind of say this about science, and there's also this resistance, this gap, this space where people will, as you can see in our chat, as you can see all over the internet and so on, where people will stay believing in free will because of this apparent space opened up by quantum indeterminacy, which is not a philosophical. I don't think it's a way to go, but I think it is psychologically true that this is a thing which keeps people aiming towards freedom as opposed to dismissing it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And one thing that I get into a little bit at the end of this, calling back to my, previous essay back in February about Zizek and compatibilism, is that one sort of important data point here that you need to take seriously is that um, it most people really do when they first start to think about it think that it's just like obviously ridiculous to say that we could have free will if everything is determined. I mean, this is like intro to philosophy students, when they first hear about this idea, will often like reinterpret it in their heads into something that makes more sense to them. So say, oh, you must be saying that like even if most things are determined, right? Some things can still be free will, right? That like that would sort of make sense to them in a way that this doesn't, right? So you do have this like really strong intuition that I think generally people are going to have when they're first confronted with that it's that there's some sort of conflict there, and you can like obviously overcome that, right? We both have, but I also think that having overcome it, you do need a theory of it, right? So I kind of try to supply that at the end, right? It's like, well, why is it, right? It's not just like sort of, everybody is stupid, right? This is this very, very common appearance that things that that things are this way, that like those ideas don't fit together. And so if it's mistaken, right, we need to kind of say where the mistake comes from. Like if they it's that it's sort of the same way that if everybody sees things in the same visually misleading way, right, we need some sort of theory of optics that's like, okay, here's why that looks that way to everybody, even though it's
Yeah,
really
and I think there's an answer which is clearly related to what you quote Zizek as saying in this article, which is Zizek's example of kind of the movie protagonist, who gives an example of freedom because you'll have this movie protagonist who'll do something, they'll plan their wedding up until the last day, and then they'll run off and marry the guy that they actually should be with or whatever.
right.
Against all reason and logic and all previous desire. Well, not all previous
Yeah,
desires
yeah,
either,
yeah,
but
yeah,
all
yeah.
previous determinations. Um, and that's kind of a freedom of chaos. But I think what compatibilists are suggesting, and which I think makes sense when you kind of elaborate, and it makes a lot of sense when you kind of argue for it and make it clear, but on the face of it, it seems strange, which is the idea that freedom is actually order. I think that's a weird idea on the face of it, but I think it's definitely true.
Yeah. And I mean, this is, I mean, maybe we'll get into this as we go on, but I mean, I think one way of thinking about this is that, you know, for people who know like the various things that like Kant says about free will, there's like a thread of Kant on free will that I think very like the sort of current Zizek stuff very strongly echoes, right? This the sort of mysterious noumenal kind of freedom. But there's also a thread of what Kant says about free will that that sort of leads to what we think, right? That like it's that that freedom that like really strongly links freedom to like practical reasoning. And so yeah, I mean I think there is a sort of persistent and understandable attachment to the idea that that like freedom has a lot to do with spontaneity. I think that I think it's kind of easy to see where that comes from. And yeah, I mean his actual examples sound like better movies than the sort of example you just gave, but but like the basic point I think is the same. And
Zizek definitely knows movies better than me.
yeah, it's actually the last time I and like just pop culture in general. Last time I saw him at Hay this year, the essay starts with the story about the going last year, but the one this year, uh, we had lunch. I think I disappointed him by not having seen The Last of Us. That's because he had takes. But yeah, in but in any case,
you should have just been Zizekian and not let the fact that you hadn't seen it stop
stop me from offering some takes. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's I think that sort of makes sense, right? Like it's sort of very. I mean, there's an obvious way in which, like, if I'm sort of, it feels like I'm kind of displaying my freedom more if I'm if I'm hey, look, I can do whatever I want, right? Like I'm doing something that you wouldn't think I would do and goes against expectations, whatever. That's like like I'm doing that. But I think if you're acting like the kind of freedom, the kind of self-control that I think matters most when you really start thinking about what makes the kind of beings that we really think of as persons who are responsible for their behavior different from other kinds of beings, and why, right? It's not, it's I don't think it's really so much. I mean, look, my cat who was on screen a minute ago regularly engages in spontaneous behavior that I can't make sense of.
Right. I mean, I think that's the important thing to clarify, that there are various kinds of freedom, and all of which are kind of legitimate in their
Sure.
use in human language. If you say the cat is free to go out the cat flap, that's
Yeah.
true, but it's distinct from the sense that I'm free to go out the cat flap.
Yeah. That's like yeah, maybe the point of the cat flap is to make the cat sort of politically free to go out, that like that nobody will stop him, but but it's not but it doesn't really seem to be the kind of autonomy that we think means that it's like it's his own fault, if he did, right. That doesn't seem relevant to that concept, right? So what I mean, I think I say some of this, we're going to watch more of it in a minute, but like I think I say some of this in the discussion, but what I spent a lot more time on in the essay than I was able to in the discussion is just like, okay, what's if you think about what it is that seems to make creatures like us, reasonably cognitively standard adult humans, typically seem to be persons and responsible for our behavior and all that stuff, whereas we think that various other kinds of beings, cats, people, very small children, who, we might use the word person for in the sense of like we think they deserve the same moral regard or more, right? But like in the but like they're not sort of haven't quite come into their personhood and like aren't sort of fully responsible yet, for their behavior.
You shouldn't listen to them a lot of the time,
Yes, exactly.
including about like their thoughts, feelings, and desires.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, or, even adults, human beings suffering from certain kinds of mental incapacity or, etc. That like, the reason that we think that all these kinds of, beings that I've just mentioned have, diminished responsibility or maybe no responsibility even for, in some cases, for their actions is that, I don't think is so much about the capacity for spontaneity, right? That's any less, right? That it's but it's the opposite, right? Like you said, that there's like a certain kind of order that comes from having a cognitive mechanism that makes you capable of understanding and sort of weighing the importance of and being at least somewhat moved by reasons for and against different courses of action, and that this is this kind of autonomy in terms of of that kind of practical reasoning, which doesn't mean that you have to be perfectly rational to be have enough control to be responsible for your behavior. You certainly don't, right? But like, there's a certain minimum threshold of capacity in that regard that does seem to be necessary. That is that's what really seems to differentiate the kind of creatures that we think of as autonomous, responsible for their behavior from the ones who aren't, right? So I think that definitely part of the explanation for the intuition you're talking about has to do with this sort of movie example spontaneity stuff. I ultimately also think that that the questions that we ask, like because as you say, there are lots of different senses in which somebody can be free, not just like politically free versus free in your head or whatever, but also that there are different more abstract senses in which you could be free, and free from what, free to do what, right? That
Yeah, I mean, and also like the human freedom's scary
sure,
and
yeah,
difficult and hard.
yeah,
If you're freed like a cat, then you're not responsible for anything. You can't be held to account for anything. You can't just go about and do whatever you want. And I see a lot of stuff online where people will express kind of jealousy for dogs and cats, and they'll express jealousy for when they were children.
sure,
These various times where they didn't really have full human freedom because not having this full human freedom was a relief. And yeah, I think there is this thing of there's the backing away from human freedom, especially in kind of our postmodern time, because it forces you to confront the fact that you really are thrown in this world, into a world of
yeah,
other human beings, but at the same time, kind of ultimately responsible for yourself.
yeah. I think that's right. I think that kind of Sartrean, people are very anxious about being free. I think there is, I mean, I think is probably an important point because there's like a certain kind of rhetorical posture that people often adopt when they deny that free will exists, which is like, look, I've liberated myself from wishful thinking, right? Like you've helped yourself to this lovely flattering assumption that you're a free being, causing things to happen. Whereas I'm, have adopted the coldly rational scientific posture that I know that I'm not. But I think what you're pointing to is like, yeah, slow down there, right? That like I think there's a big sense in which free will denial can be wish fulfillment in itself, which is actually a very Zizekian point also. That sort of that last little reversal, but yeah, that you can have that it's that there's something comforting about it, that that you're avoiding this this kind of responsibility. I think that's totally right. And I think it's even linked to the ways that sort of expanding, you know, social and political freedom can be, can be scary. I remember Nick Stang is a philosophy professor, studied, it's a Kant scholar, had sort of jokingly making this point to me many years ago that it's like, look, there's something that's like, at least under feudalism, it's like genuinely not your fault, what happens to you, that there's something like if you're born under capitalism, at least in sort of like a sort of middle class minimum of comfort, then like suddenly you get much more neurotic because like you actually fucked up by not rising higher in the social structure, right? And there's probably a parallel point to be made about capitalism and socialism, that if you have that like sort of greater social freedom actually giving people more autonomy.
Right, and now in postmodernity, we're poor, but people will tell you on Twitter that you're perpetrating the Palestinian genocide if you're not posing enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yes, you haven't posted your way to stopping it yet. This, which is really funny because that's also the sort of the flip side of all of the, why haven't you condemned Hamas people? That it's all like always. I made this joke when they did the stream with Jason and Trey and Catherine Liu before Halloween to talk about horror movies. Started talking about Israel at the end, and I asked Catherine if she'd condemned Hamas, and she actually seemed to get a little nervous for a second. It's like, and I was like, okay, well that's good, right? Because I'm pretty sure that somewhere in Gaza, this was weeks ago, and at this point, even this is sort of things have gotten much grimmer than this, but it's like, I'm sure somewhere in Gaza, in the ruins of a bombed out apartment block, somebody's putting together a rocket propelled grenade right now. And if somebody ran up to them and said, no, my friend, you have to stop. Catherine Liu has condemned you. Right. Then like
you would start unscrewing it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, in any case, circling back to the point, I condemn it all for whatever it's worth, which is absolutely nothing. But but circling back to the point about this, that I think that I think. So, okay, so I think there's like a kind of psychological motivation we talked about. I think you're right about the spontaneity and order thing. But I also think like a big part of where this intuition comes from, this intuitive appearance that free will is incompatible with determinism, is that because there are all these different, senses of freedom, some of which surely are compatible with determinism and some of which are not. And we sort of have to sort out which are which and which matter for other important concepts like personhood and responsibility. I think the framing of the questions that we ask, since most people are not, super attuned to the difference, and that fact requires no explanation. I mean, most people, philosophy is hard. Most people aren't making like super fine-grained conceptual distinctions in their heads most of the time. So I think that the framing of the questions that we ask about free will invites us to sort of default to one or another, kind of freedom that we're thinking about, one or another sort of conception, and, without necessarily clearly distinguishing it from the rest. So I think if you're sort of in contexts of kind of ordinary everyday attributions of responsibility, then we tend to default to something that's, very much like the kind of compatibilist approach to free will we've been talking about, that, we generally think that cognitively typical adult human beings are responsible for things. We might even explain why, in ordinary non-philosophical context by saying, well, look, you did that of your own free will, right? You decided to do that, right? Nobody made you. Whereas when we ask so that's how we would answer the question, is it, John's fault that, he, that, that he slept with, Jim's wife or whatever, right? That's like, in that sort of context, right? Then it's like, we very quickly default to that. Whereas if you radically switch the context by saying, is free will compatible with physical determinism? Then I think you've invited people to do this really deep context switch, where it's like suddenly we're not talking about the sort of factors that we ordinarily think are relevant to the kind of free will.
Yeah, and I mean, no one ever brings up determinism apart from to talk about it in the context of how it determines everything, So it's almost like a kind of statement of like, it's kind of it's biased against us, Ben. It's a conspiracy.
Yeah. I mean, well, because you say that, right, and like suddenly, I think what the question itself invites the listener to do is to start thinking in terms of a kind of freedom that actually would be threatened by sort of global cosmic determinism.
I think just the effect of kind of like saying determinism in that context implies that like it elides the fact that you determine you in any way. Like I think this is the kind of statement who really creates the idea in the mind of determinism as a force. Because determinism isn't a force, right? Determinism is like an emergent description of the reality of all the sets of things in the world and their interactions. But it's not some kind of force in of itself. But I think the kind of idea of like, is freedom compatible with determinism? Kind of the actor in that statement becomes determinism as if it's a thing with powers that does stuff.
Yeah. No, I think that could definitely also happen. I mean, you'll see that with intro students that they'll often sort of jump to, okay, if we're to talking about determinism that way, or maybe even assume that determinism has something to do with the idea of like God or fate or something like that. That those are all sort of concepts that it's very easy to run together, to run together in your head. But I mean, I think like, look, there are things in order to be free choose your own decisions, through like, that you're doing things for the reasons that you care about, you understand the reasons, you're not incapacitated, etc. To have that kind of freedom too, there's certainly things you need to be free from, hypnotism, drugs, brainwashing, mind control rays, but
Very serious BDSM kit.
Yes, exactly. But then there aren't really, but and those are, I think, the kinds of things that we think that you have to be free from in ordinary everyday attributions of autonomy and responsibility. But then I think when you sort of start saying, it's like, okay, but what if absolutely everything is determined, even if you do understand it correctly, right? You're not sort of I'm very embarrassed that I can't remember this word, but but you're not like turning a concept into a thing in your head.
Reification.
Thank you. You're not reifying you're not reifying determinism as like a thing in itself that's that's cause and effects, rather than simply the observation that everything is a result of some sort of cause, some sort of chain of cause and effects. Even if you're not doing that, right, you're not making these mistakes. You understand what's being asked. I think it's still I think that the framing does still invite you to start thinking in terms of some grandiose notion of freedom that freedom from causation, freedom from physical laws, um, and that the sort of mistake that I think Slavoj is making in his more recent take on this stuff is that even though I think he still has a lot of good instincts, and you even see that in the clip we just watched, right? I mean, there's the sort of resistance to saying that freedom plays out on some sort of spiritual, non-material level of reality.
Freedom as a determination is not a word, not a phrase I've heard before, but I quite like it.
Yeah. So even though there are a lot of good instincts on display there, right? I think that maybe just by virtue of the fact that in his more recent stuff, he's often addressing slightly different questions, right? Than he was talking about in that earlier passage. I think that that's sort of led him to do something that many very smart and perceptive people have been led to do, which is just sort of say, okay, well, whatever this is, it must be something really mysterious, and to then start to sort of hunt for ways that we could make sense of this mysterious, elusive sense of human freedom. And this is, and in his case, I think hunt in all sorts of interesting places. Again, I find the movie discussions interesting. I think that there's some pretty deep waters with the his kind of take on Hegel here, which connects with things that he said in lots of other books. There's even the quantum physics stuff that's I have the Mark Twain instinct about myself. Probably better to keep my mouth shut and be thought somebody who doesn't understand that than start spouted off on it and reveal myself as somebody who definitely doesn't understand it. All of these are interesting, and I think he has insightful things to say about many of them. But the question is, well, do you need to do that, right? Do you need to go hunting on all these places for a way to make sense of this, or were you kind of right the first time, right? And that actually maybe it's not that deep.
Yeah.
All right, you wanna watch a bit more?
Yeah, we can.
Free will.
Oh.
It opens.
Why is he not making noise? Oh, because I muted the site.
up a space for it in natural reality itself, demonstrating that the image of natural reality as a wholly deterministic space is not true. And the beauty of it, I think, is that you don't need any higher spiritual level here to operate with. You just have to accept, and now we come to the metaphysical beauty of quantum physics. Now we live in a wonderful era. Till now, for the last 60, 70 years, the so-called Copenhagen interpretation predominated.
Right.
The basic thesis of Copenhagen interpretation is, as we all know, don't think, just calculate. Copenhagen didn't simply prohibited, not even the metaphysical, this ontological question. Okay, quantum physics speaks about something, waves, oscillations, collapse of wave function, but what's the ontological status of this? Niels Bohr says, these are just our calculations. The only reality we know is the naive material reality. Naive in the sense that it acts following our common sense. But now things are changing. I love this violent return of metaphysical questions. And you know what's the beauty of it? The standard materialist notion is that reality is spatio-temporal. Object moves in time within space. These two basic coordinates. Now, it's beautiful. There is a big conflict between which is more primordial, space or time. It's a beautiful debate. because it's clear. And in debate with some of them, quantum physicists, they all admit that if we remain within the opposition of time and space, we will not find a solution. So the general opinion is one of the two will have to be abandoned. Abandoned in the sense that it's not an ontologically original dimension. Now, you
Somehow
have...
supervenes on the other one. Sorry, finish your point.
No. My point is just that Einsteinians are more for space. The idea is, it's beautiful metaphysics, that time is just an effect of our cognitive limitation. Like, I cannot see everything, all of, let's say, your room, so I need time to move from here to there. And it's much more complex, but the basic idea is that the reality itself already exists. Everything, what we perceive as past, future, and present, in an atemporal block.
Right.
And that time is just because we are finite beings who cannot grasp it all. But then there are guys, my guys, who claim, no, time is the primordial dimension. And that here, of course, I enter with my speculations, time in the sense of antagonism, Hegelian negativity, and so on and so on. So comes second.
Yeah, so like I would circle back a little bit though, right? Like on the face of it, you think like if quantum physics is supposed to help with free will, then it's a little bit confusing as to how, because it seems like either like I think Bohr says at some point, they're like hidden variables and it's actually deterministic anyway.
Oh, wait a minute. This is, you touched now a mega problem. The greatness of Bohr is that he rejected hidden variables.
Okay. So
Einstein says to account for all this, there must be hidden variables.
Okay.
And the beauty of Bohr is that precisely he daringly asserted an open universe.
Okay.
No, there are gaps in reality. Reality is incomplete.
Okay. So yeah, fair enough. So if you say that reality is incomplete, Einstein's wrong, God does play dice with the universe, it seems like then the problem is with that one, then if there's some sort of quantum randomness that filters up to decision making in the human brain, that doesn't really seem like what we want for free will. If there's just some quantum equivalent of a coin flip.
No, I agree with you. Wait a minute. I'm here very careful.
Okay.
I'm not saying that free will is at the same level as quantum contingency oscillations. I'm just saying that in order for free will not to be just a user's illusion, then somehow reality must not be totally predetermined. Reality must be open. Now, we are far from free will, but in a negative way, if you take the traditional naturalistic notion of universe as a closed deterministic complex, then obviously there is no space of free will.
Well, it's not obvious to everybody, right? This is
how can you do it? Tell me how.
Well, I mean, you be a compatibilist. This is the position you seem to be endorsing less than nothing. That you say that you deny that not being predetermined is a condition of free will. That you say free will, or the kind of free will that we care about the most, might be something like, for example, our capacity to consider alternate courses of action, to reflect on and be moved by reasons for and against those courses of action, etc., and that none of that is in conflict with free will. That perhaps, none of that is in conflict with the assumption of physical determinism. That if you the same that perhaps if you have if your conception of, if what you think you need to be in order to be free in the ways that might matter, certainly for moral evaluation, for responsibility for your actions. If you think that what you need to be free in order to be free in that way is this kind of radical freedom from the laws of physics, then sure, maybe you need this quantum indeterminacy. But I wonder, is that really the kind of freedom that matters on a human level?
No, but this, I think that it does. Maybe I changed my position because I think that the position that, if I got you correctly, you advocate now is the position that even if we are at some basic ontological level, just mechanisms. I mean, automatic mechanisms determine blah, blah. At the level of social life, we experience ourselves as free.
Certainly, yeah.
I think that's not enough.
Well, but it's not just that we experience ourselves as free. I want to be really clear about that, right? Because somebody could say, I agree that that's not very interesting if all we say is, it seems as if we're free, or maybe it's like a useful illusion rather than a useless one to say that we're free. If that's all you say, then I agree. That's yes, I agree that that's a very limited interest. But my question is it actually the case that in order to be free, like in other words, in order to objectively be free in the way that matters, there's surely lots of different kinds of freedom or senses of freedom, and I wouldn't deny that some of them conflict with the assumption of determinism. But could it be that in order to be free in the way that matters for moral responsibility, for something objectively being your fault or to your credit, when you do it, that for that, right, that the kind of freedom that matters might be not so much freedom from causation, freedom from the laws of physics, but this kind of freedom to determine the course of your life through, as I say, being these capacities to understand and be moved by reasons for and against different courses of action. That seems to be what separates us from other kinds of animals that we wouldn't necessarily think are free in that way. It seems to be the kind of sense in which, when we think that people aren't responsible for their actions because they couldn't help it, because they're severely mentally disabled, for example, that seems to be the kind of freedom that they seem to lack, right? So I think the kind of compatibilism that's interesting, and I agree. And I
have problems. I see your point now, clearly. I have problems with compatibilism because still it doesn't explain how the two levels that you treat as compatible relate to each other. Let's return to Daniel Dennett, whom you mentioned. He still insists that if we were to know reality more completely, we would be able to account for all our acts in terms of natural determinism. For him, he even uses sometimes this expression that the intentionality, like when you explain, he gives this example. If I ask you now to do something, to turn off or on your light, the answer, why did you do that, would be because we communicate not at the material level and I ask you to do this. But then it says that a complete true explanation in the strict scientific sense would have been to describe this at a more elementary level, that I'm telling you something can be translated into how atomic, subatomic particles move, which affect you, and so on. So that for Dennett, nonetheless, the language of intentionality, he gets a little bit ambiguous here, but his basic insight is that the language of intentionality is a kind of a useful simplification. It's beyond the scope of our cognitive capacities to describe all up to the detail that goes physically on. But we are losing time. I want to focus on another point.
Sure.
I agree with your central point, which is like, let's say you are oppressed, the police or whoever beats you, bank foreclose your account, blah, blah. So you are in deep shit. You have to do something. What can they do here? This type of metaphysical speculations, are you really free or not? Here I see the danger of artificial intelligence, of brain studies and so on. But what if, and this field is advancing incredibly, what if through direct interventions into your DNA or some more primitive chemical implants into your brain, I can change your character to such a level that you would react differently to such challenges. This is not, and this is far from, this is far from an illusion. I read somewhere, this is I think I mentioned this in another of my books. Some weird guy with Arab name, I'm not a racist here, just who has a big clinic in Berlin, Germany, already has a project. Instead of maternal womb, he has some kind of a transparent from glass and plastic artificial womb, and he demands from parents of a child, just give me sperm and all that stuff, and then before even the process of birth begins, which is all done in the lab, he gives you, it's pretty terrifying reading, 150 variations where you can make a choice. Not just physical, what color of an eye, how strong will you be, color of your hair, how high, but also psychic properties. Will you be more decisive, aggressive? Will you be more peaceful, and so on and so on? So, here the problem for me enters. Because here, okay, you are screwed up by a bank, whoever, police, a gang beats you. But how you will react to it can be already scientifically manipulated. So why is this important? Because I learned from my Chinese friends that Chinese biogenetics is already focusing on this. How to influence at the level of DNA and so on. How to change what you are biologically, so that, to put it in official terminology, to be socially more constructive, not to protest too much, and so on and so on. So here I think that what you are metaphysically becomes important also in your social behavior. Yes, as you said, you will protest, but if I manipulate your brain enough, you will do a very benevolent protest, or even try to make people more submissive to social norms, This has a long history already in Stalinist Soviet Union, where they tried to, it was done at a much more primitive level. But the idea was that to be a dissident, rebellious behavior means something is wrong with your brain. And they tried to directly intervene into your brain. They treated politically active dissident stance not as, this is beyond the standard Stalinism, not your grandparents must have been bourgeois, bad influence. No. Simple, pure biological malfunctioning of your brain. These are, I think, the threats today. But you know which is another thing, and let's conclude then if you want this philosophical part, which is important for
Sure.
me.
Yes.
It is this opposition between what I call abstract and concrete freedom. There are moments of here, if you are looking for my pessimism, you will
Yeah.
find it here. When I point out that there are moments of abstract freedom, these are revolutionary moments where precisely not all, we still speak the same language and so on, but many of basic rules of decency, of non-violence break down. This is how I read that wonderful quote from Sartre, you know, when he said that already, although under German occupation, the terror was more or less
Right.
complete,
Yep.
in some sense, they were more
It's
free
more
than
free,
ever.
Yes.
Why? Because uh, because precisely because there was no space for freedom within the existing set of rules imposed by the German occupier, you have to think more radically. But another thing here, which
Okay.
I
All right. Could probably cut off before the another thing. Just wanted to make sure the last few minutes of that got onto different subjects, but since the subjects were a little tangled up together, I wanted to make sure we're getting the whole relevant part of it there. And yeah, I think certainly the first part of what we just watched, you got, I think you got the sort of basic core disagreement.
Well, it was. I mean, some parts of it was just a bit like Zizek, often correctly listing kind of the great mysteries of present day science,
uh,
like is time fundamental or is it an emergent factor because we have an arrow of time or so on and so forth. But it's like, what's this do with human freedom?
yeah, right. Like, I mean, this is, there's going to be a bunch of, this is, look, you pay your ticket, you take the ride, right? You've got, that's, uh, if you're going to talk to them, right, the subjects are going to mix and match in odd ways, and parts of it are going to come to bear, and parts of it really won't, but they'll be interesting. And
Did
there's
you know Sean Carroll?
yeah,
Did you see he did a video of Zizek?
I did not know.
You should really watch it. Well, I mean, it's enormous, so you have to find the time, but it's very good. I mean, it was
Okay.
meant to be kind of like the interviewer mostly talking to them, but it just ends up Zizek interviewing Sean Carroll.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, so it's like, look, if you want linearity, he's probably not your guy, but but also he's genuinely one of the most interesting human beings to talk to. So, I'll take that particular ride. But yeah. So yes, I agree. Like some of those, some of the stuff about space and time, didn't connect in any obvious way. And, and at the end we were talking about, I still get the connection when we're talking about, brain manipulation and stuff, but then, then we sort of veer off, into a bunch of increasingly more political and social things at the end. And
We did get back to Sartre in the end, though.
yeah, we did briefly get back to Sartre's. That was exciting, but not really Sartre's views on free will exactly. So, yeah, in kind of authenticity, right? So it's not unrelated, but yeah. So I think that in but in the most relevant part to the original issue, I was bringing him up and pressing him on. I think that I think we did get to one of my most fundamental things, which is just I don't know. I mean, I think maybe he hasn't read the right compatibilists. That he
Right,
like
he was still thinking about it in terms of like illusionism.
yeah. So because he's talking about Dennett, right? So who's the guy he seemed to find convincing in 2012, and he says much more critical things about in the free will chapter of the new book, and one of my issues with Dennett, I think this made it into the final version of the essay for today, is that I haven't read that much Dennett, but from what I have, right, I've looked a little bit at the book from like a year or two ago, the one with Greg Caruso, where they're like the arguing about free will and responsibility. Um, it's I get the impression that Dennett's position is a little bit ambiguous between, like, okay, Dennett clearly thinks that there is a sense in which you can exercise a certain kind of control, even given determinism, right? He obviously does think that. But some of the formulations I've seen from Dennett are a little ambiguous between thinking that if you exercise that control, you actually are responsible for your behavior, or versus it's sort of useful for promoting good consequences for us to like treat people who exercise that kind of control as being responsible for their behavior, or to like attribute responsibility to them or something like that, right? Those are really different positions. And from what I've seen, I do kind of get the impression, maybe this is unfair, that Dennett goes back and forth between the two a little bit depending on when he's talking.
I think the main problem with Dennett, as to being read by, say Zizek or whatever, is that, he does a thing which continental philosophers are often accused of being like the only people who do it of,
The
which is where he'll take a common word with a common meaning and then he'll use it in a weird way in his text, which if you read all his definitions and all his works, it makes complete sense what he's saying. But if you then translate it, you don't translate it and just say it as it was in English, it's like nonsense. It's like, oh yeah, we have freedom, but consciousness is an illusion. It's like, well, where does freedom live if consciousness is an illusion? But of course, by consciousness is an illusion, he actually just means that consciousness doesn't work like how you think it works,
right.
and human freedom doesn't work like how you think it works, but it exists. And by illusion, he means something which does exist rather than doesn't.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that is as they say, a whole nother thing. I'm not gonna make any attempt to weigh in ignorance about all of that. My Dennett lore doesn't go that deep, but yeah, I mean, I think, like I give the example in the essay of, John Martin Fisher, who I think has really useful things to say, that, that if, Zizek were maybe interacting with some of that rather than Dennett, it at least might sort of, give him a kind of more useful, a more useful sense of like where like a reasonable compatibilist position is set, right? So what somebody like Fisher will say is, look, I'm not even trying to save freedom to do otherwise, which I will say, this is not Fisher, this is me parenthetically. I think maybe you can save, but like we've talked about this before. But Fisher's not even trying to save it, because he's very convinced by like Frankfurt cases where there are a million versions of this case, but they're all but the sort of basic idea is that there's this guy Jones who's going to do something or not do it, and there's a hypothetical intervener, Black, who will step in if it looks like Jones isn't going to make the decision that Black wants him to make, and like intervene to manipulate his brain or whatever he has to do to make sure that Jones does make the decision he wants him to make. And Frankfurt's conclusion from thinking about Frankfurt cases, and certainly Fisher's conclusion, is that well, in a case like this, right, a case where Black does not intervene, so Fisher's main original essay about this, I think also called Alternate Possibilities, More Responsibility, but it has it's kind of funny because his example in there is all about Jones deciding who to vote for in the 1992 election, and that actually doesn't strike me as a terribly morally weighted decision, because it's like, yeah, George H.W. Bush or Bill Clinton, real clash of very different ideological visions there. But in any case, but he has Black wanting Jones to vote for Clinton, and if Black wants if Jones had started to do something that indicated in whatever way, maybe Black is brain scanning him the whole time, right, that but that indicated the possibility that he might decide to vote for Bush, then Black would intervene neurochemically to make him do it. But as a matter of fact, Jones doesn't do that, right? Jones just votes for Clinton, and Black never has to intervene. And Jones is making his decision in the normal way, like anybody would. And we're not assuming anything one way or the other about causal determinism or anything like that. We're just just ordinary garden variety experience. Well, Frankfurt and Fisher's point is, if you would think that Jones is responsible for this absent Black, right, then the introduction of Black doesn't seem to change anything, because it has absolutely nothing to do with the chain of cause and effect that actually leads to his decision. And so what they conclude from this is that freedom to do otherwise doesn't really seem like the sort of free will that matters for moral responsibility. That like the sort of control over your actions that matters for moral responsibility isn't about what would have happened in some alternate possibility or anything like that, and therefore that it doesn't really matter if determinism closes off those alternate possibilities, right? That's their view. There's a lot you could say about this, because obviously people have raised many objections to this argument, and there are interesting responses to the objections, but just skipping right over all of that. Then the question is, well, what kind of control do you need to exercise over your actions to be truly objectively responsible for it, not just a socially beneficial illusion, but like you actually are responsible, you actually are a person. Then he starts getting into all this stuff that we talked about earlier about responsiveness to reasons. And I bring all this up not just because that happens to be the view that I more or less agree with, but at least as far as what the conditions are for the kind of autonomy that seems to really matter for moral responsibility and personhood. But because I think that this is I think that that if what you're sort of interacting with is Dennett having this very idiosyncratic cluster of concepts that leaves you a little bit unclear at the end whether he even actually means real full-on compatibilism, or whether ultimately all these concepts kind of add up to you might as well talk as if you are, or something like that. I think if you're interacting with something like that, which is like a very clear kind of compatibilist view, I think it at least kind of helps to clarify what should be argued against. And I guess the last point I would make about this is just that on the question he raises in there in the discussion about levels, I don't particularly see a big problem there, because or I guess to be more careful about this, I think to see a problem there, you would have to have some like pretty extreme skepticism about ordinary mental concepts. You would basically have to be a member of the Churchland family to see a problem here, right? Because I think the sort of, it's like, yes, you're right, at the level of subatomic particles or even neurons, we're not talking like, sure, those are things that don't have free will. Um, they're also invisible, but you put a whole bunch of them together and they're visible, right? Lots of things have lots of properties. And
Right. So subatomic particles can't get wet.
yes, exactly. And yet, that's
I remember once on Reddit Ask Philosophy, someone was trying to make the point that like composites would always have the properties of the things that they're composed of. Um, and I was like, so you're saying that galaxies are wet because some of the things in them are wet? And he was like, yes.
it's see, that's some real internet philosophy there. That not just like there's also like a particular kind of internet philosophy where like the sort of what counts as like a kind of intellectual virtue gets completely flipped. That it's not that the criteria for success is that you've said things that sort of fit together in a way that's plausibly true, but instead the criteria of success is that you said something that's extremely based, and
Yes.
the thing that makes it
I was going to
extremely
say he did Chad yes me and he did win morally.
yeah, exactly, right? Like, yeah, when you get to do the like, so you're saying galaxies are wet, Chad, yes, right? That's like a win because, like, because
Yes.
it's like, because it's so base that you said something so implausible and stuck with it.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking earlier that in a very kind of stupid sense, reductive physicalists are panpsychists
Okay.
in the sense that they think the basic, in the sense that, we
Oh, I
talk
see
about
what
two
you
kinds of
did.
panpsychism, one where everything is mind, which is stupid,
Yeah.
and one where, like, within everything, there is the building blocks of mind. And as you
Uh-huh.
get more and more together, you get more mind.
Okay.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, and physicalists are panpsychists in the sense that they think in that subatomic particles are constitutive of the building blocks of mind, and that there's nothing else involved.
Yeah. No, I like it. That's true. Yeah. That's fun.
And I guess all the fundamental particles in your brain. I've got no idea.
Okay. Well, further research needed to see if all the fundamental particles are in your brain. Otherwise, this might not quite work. But
Do I have electrons in my brain which aren't made of quarks?
yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah. I will note that in that discussion, I was being very careful not to assent to the premise that electrons are made of quarks. Not because I actually knew it was false. I did not. But just because I was like afraid that I might be saying something false if I affirmed the premise.
Yeah, but like, as soon as I said that, I had doubts. I was like, oh fuck.
Yeah. Well, you know, nothing compared to my shame for saying Bohr when I met Bohm in the discussion with Slavoj. But
I can't remember the difference between those two.
uh,
Um, it's
yeah.
funny though. The Nobel Prize was about Bell's theorem for the other
Okay.
BMAT,
Okay.
and it was about local hidden variables, eliminating some theories of local hidden variables, and about
Okay.
proving that. It's funny. Like there's also things in physics which like we've proved this 100%, and they've never done a practical experiment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like it really, really fits, and when we do them, it definitely will be. And the Nobel Prize was for them doing one of these with quantum entanglement. In yeah, it was about quantum entanglement and hidden variables and so on.
Yeah. Um.
It was interesting.
Well.
I
Yeah.
thought he was about to bring up many worlds there when he was talking about the
Yeah.
Copenhagen.
Right.
Then
Because
he,
that would have definitely fit the sort of drift of what he was saying about people for the longest time Copenhagen was incredibly dominant but now yeah that would have made sense.
because it would perfectly fit with with what Sean Carroll says, because Sean Carroll makes this massive point of being like, we have these equations, but basically we don't know what they mean. And we use them and they work
uh,
perfectly, but we don't really understand them. And that's an enormous embarrassment for physics. And that's why
yeah.
you want, the many worlds interpretation to win out because and it's the one he agrees with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am actually definitely going to watch that. That sounds fun. But yeah, gonna take just as I did last December, going to
Yes, Christmas.
take a few weeks off of YouTubery. So people will have to do without us. We will have like a clip on the channel, assuming you're watching this on GTA at least once every couple days during the break, and we are even going to be recording just a little bit of new stuff to put out during that period. But and if you're watching this on TIR, they never take breaks. They're there's new TIR content once an hour on the hour, 365 days a year. But
All gas breaks.
yeah, exactly. All right, but we'll see you in 2024.
Wow, the future is now.